Thanks for joining our webinar, Overcoming the 3 Key Outdoor Lighting Myths, Healthcare Campus Relight Strategies. We encourage you to enter questions in the WebEx question utility so we can address them at the end of the presentation. Our presenter today is Karen Gale. She's become a recognized expert in all aspects of lighting a healthcare facility, with undergraduate and MBA degrees from Georgia State University and more than 16 years of lighting industry experience. She leads Acuity brand's healthcare market development, ensuring market leadership in the healthcare space through technological advancements, evidence-based design principles, and voice of customer insights. In just the past few years, Karen has directly connected with thousands of participants across North America via educational presentations, workshops, focus groups, and in-depth seminars on lighting and controls design for healthcare facilities. She is also the author of numerous bylined articles in focused trade publications. Please meet Karen.
Thank you, Holly. So Holly made me sound awesome. She also gave me expectations that I'm going to have to live up to, so don't drop off the call too quickly. But really, really excited to talk about this topic. So really the focus here is going to be on outdoor LED lighting. I'll craft it around the healthcare market because that's my favorite market to talk about. But certainly you'll get some tools that would work for you in other markets as well. And we're really going to focus on some of the misconceptions about outdoor LED lighting and how, more importantly, we can overcome them. So I'll kind of run through this, and at the end we can open it up for questions. Okay, if that sounds good, copyright, don't need to talk about that. So a couple of observations. So the reason that we really thought this talk was important was a few things. So we know, and for the folks on the call, I'm sure you work on new construction. You probably also work on renovation. But when you look at it from a new construction perspective, certainly, I mean, in the outdoor space, we're only thinking about LED lighting. It's been that way for a number of years. However, if you were to look at the install base, in many cases, you're still seeing the predominant source being non-LED, right? We think LED is probably minimally converted, and I'll talk about that. So that's some of the observations. The reason that LED, now this is the Captain Obvious portion of the presentation. There's not really any other source that's going to have the same benefits with LED. So efficiency, longevity, performance, but still we see the inefficient light sources, and we also see, I think this is very important, particularly for healthcare, there's not always the recognition of all the non-operational benefits you can get. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. All right, first things first, we're going to talk about what's happening in the healthcare market. This is, and hopefully I have a bunch of healthcare facility managers and directors on the call, and if so, hopefully you're nodding your head, not nodding off. For some folks, this is post-lunch. But what's happening in the healthcare industry is really unprecedented in a lot of ways. We're seeing new policy with Affordable Care Act in the United States. We're seeing major demographic shifts with aging population. We're also seeing a lot of fiscal challenges, and I'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. So you've got more coverage and access from a policy perspective, but cost of care is going up, reimbursements are going down. That's not a good equation. I'm not a math major, but that's not a good equation. You've got an older population, which, oh, by the way, can tend to be sicker. And then all this is really interesting, but for a provider, that's interesting, but it's all about outcomes, experience, and safety. So that's really the order of the day. So how can we address that? When we talk about fiscal challenges, margins are super constrained. Healthcare and hospitals aren't the same thing. Certainly there's this whole continuum of care. We see a lot more activity happening on the outpatient side. When you look at just the hospital world to try to get a sense of the margin profile, look at this kind of pie chart and look over to the right for not-for-profit hospitals. The typical not-for-profit hospital doesn't make a lot of money, about 2%. So essentially if I have a 2% margin, that means that $1 on the bottom line is $50 on the top line. So when we talk about saving people dollars and cents, we realize it's impactful in this very margin-constrained world. The next piece is about sustainability and energy. Essentially what happens is the DOE does their CBECs, they do their market characterization surveys every couple of years. So the data lags, but and I think that over time, as we've used more efficient sources, I know that the overall intensity of light has gone down. When we think about the pie chart, okay, so here's electricity, for healthcare facilities. Essentially, what the DOE says is that electricity is about 40 to 42% of a typical healthcare facility's electrical consumption. That number, I certainly see that in practice in the space. Sometimes it's into the 30s. Really depends on what you're doing with your HVAC. However, tons of low-hanging fruit to pay attention to. So if we kind of move from kind of what's happening on the energy side, what about experience? I know, guys, this sounds fluffy, sounds like it's not something that you should care about, but experience matters. Each of us can put ourselves in the shoes of being a patient or being a family member supporting a patient, and then you think about the staff that have so much to do. That makes a difference. And it's also tied to things like reimbursement. So something like patient experience, that's starting to impact top and bottom lines. So if we sort of delve into the nighttime environment, right? Because outdoor lighting, ideally, I know I'm going to blow your mind with this, lights are on at night. Parking garages are a little bit different. Let's spend some time thinking about, with these trends in the backdrop, what are those big misconceptions? Okay, so the first misconception is it's what's inside that counts. I don't mean this in a touchy-feely way. I just kind of mean that a lot of times when we are looking at saving energy and we're looking at retrofits, which are awesome, we look at the indoor environment. We blaze right through the parking garage and the parking lot. We walk right into the building, and then we start looking at the opportunities for improvement. Well, there's tons of opportunity indoor. We know that. But in a healthcare facility, you can't, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, you can't shut down a hospital, for example, relight everything and then open it back up, I don't know, Monday, the following Tuesday, if your folks want a day off, and it's all relit. It's disruptive. In many cases, it's 24/7. If you're in the outpatient environment, it may not be 24/7, but you may still be running long hours 6 days a week, if not 7. So facility interiors are important, and there's miles and miles of opportunity, which I hope to talk to you about later another day. But what about outdoor? If you looked at an outdoor renovation project and you said, look, this is cool, LEDs are going to be here forever, I'm going to jump into this, and you looked at it a few years ago, things have changed really, really dramatically. So you looked to outdoor initially because you thought, okay, long burn hours, especially for the parking garage, right? It's pretty much always on. And I've got inefficient sources. So you guys got that. However, when you started looking potentially at some of the paybacks, and I won't rant about how paid back is not the right metric because in healthcare, people aren't moving out in 3 years, 5 years, or probably even 10. But even if you looked at some of those early paybacks, you were getting something that was probably 5 to 7, 5 to 10 years. And in some cases, that was a deal breaker. In many cases, it's not, and I can spend a little bit of time talking about that after the presentation. But what you've seen, what's happened recently is that you've got technology advances at the chip level. In addition to controls, you also have luminaire advances, which have, first, it's made the efficiency equation a lot more attractive, but what it's also done is it's created decreases in first cost. The other thing is that we are learning, and hopefully at the end of this talk you will learn, that we're not necessarily doing apples to apples here. So if I use the exact same amount of light in my old installation as I do with LED, I'm doing it wrong, right, to oversimplify it. So we've started installing we've started thinking about smarter luminaires that deliver the light more effectively. You couple that with technological advances and decreases in first cost, and in some cases you're able to get to 1.5 to 2 year paybacks just on energy. Not promising that in every case, but it is a reality. It is not the unicorn of outdoor ROIs. We're seeing that more and more. So, you know, kind of stepping forward, it is really something that you should look at again if you haven't for some time. The other thing is patient perception. You know, we talk a lot about first impressions, last impressions. Outdoor lighting, whether we think about it or not, is definitely a first and last impression. I'll spend a little bit more time on this. Wayfinding, so the first kind of long quote is really around wayfinding. That's the first thing that we think about when we think about healthcare exteriors, how to get from point A to point B safely. The second bullet and sub-bullets. Now, I'm a healthcare stalker just in general. You'll come to know that about me. But I even look at Yelp reviews for facilities. And you just would not believe how many reviews come out that are really around lighting. and are really around exterior lighting. The first one is not suitable for work for me to have printed in its original form, so I've kind of edited it here. But if you look at some of the second and the third bullets, I mean, things like I can't read the signs, things like it's very confusing to navigate, those things really kind of come out at a high level, and it's on Yelp, right? So patient experience is shaped. The other thing that, you know, just to kind of quantify this, think about the population that's using a healthcare facility more. So one of the things that we know is that for an inpatient facility, probably about 50% of our census, so the patients, are going to be 65 and up. But we also have caregivers that are aging, so maybe high 40s, big spike in the early 50s. But when you think about hospitals, long-term care, which your average age is going to be 79, think about how seniors consider parking in exterior environments. Parking ranks only just behind the lobby as a factor that impacted the first impression of a hospital. It's up there. So don't neglect your parking lots. Our seniors are really paying a lot of attention, in addition to safety and security. I'll delve a little bit more into these topics. So don't just run straight inside. Think about the outside just for some high-level reasons that we'll delve down into. Now let's get into some lighting nerd source stuff, which is awesome. Don't drop off. This is the good stuff. So the misconception number 2 is light is light regardless of the source, which, spoiler alert, you know it's not. We're going to talk about why. All right, so equivalency. Oh, what a loaded word. So that has been one of the challenges, I think, as LED has come to the fore, in that it delivers light in such a fundamentally different way than the glass and gas tools in our kit of parts that we had before. So it made it really difficult to say, okay, I know that this lamp or bulb emits X amount of lumens. How do I find something that's equivalent, not necessarily coming out of the luminaire, but to light the task? It was a challenge. So, you know, initially we would look at lamp wattage, so 250 watts. We know that's very inadequate when you think about LEDs, because LED wattage is just not a great determinant of light output. I could just be more or less efficient. Manufacturers like us, you rely on our recommendations, but you also want to make sure that all of us are using the same terminology. So when you look at equivalency, let's really sort of think about that a little bit more and delve into how you compare. We'll start with an LED source versus, an HID source versus LED, just to make sure that you know what you're getting. So for example, if I do a Google search on 400 watt metal halide equivalent, what's come up is a 40 watt Wallpack. So I got some skeptics on the call. I hope I do. I really hope I do, because if anybody thinks that this 12 LED 40 watt Wallpack is a real 400 watt metal halide equivalent, you're probably going to be really disappointed. So we know that even the internet, which is the source of all truth, doesn't really give us everything that we need from an equivalency perspective. If we break down a little bit, and this is 1400 lumens, which just for reference, that sounds like a downlight lumen package for me. So don't do this. If you see this come up, this is probably not enough light for you unless you really didn't need a lot of light. Let's kind of break down sort of what's the decoder ring when you're starting with something like an HID source like metal halide or, for example, high pressure sodium, and how you build to a good LED comparison. So we'll start, I'll show you this in tabular form, and then I've kind of got a waterfall that really sort of depicts it, I think, more cleanly. So metal halide, so HID lamps, you would get an initial lumen that would be reported, right? So 36,000 hours initial lumen. Is that the number that you should be looking at when you're starting to think about an LED equivalent? No, it's not, because what happens? You go from, in many cases, the luminaires that we would have been using in parking garages or in area lights were in a horizontal orientation, not all. But if you went to a horizontal orientation, let's use that for an example, you would automatically lose 4,000 lumens, right? So it would be derated for that. And then there's initial lumens, but then there's really the lumen level that the lamp will settle in at over time, let's say after 6,000 hours. So maybe you started at 36, which went to 32, and now you're at 22,000 lumens, right? You hadn't even done anything yet, right? So now you're at 22,000 lumens. Look at it in a waterfall view here, right? 400 watt metal halide, 36,000 going down to 32. You lose a lot after 6,000 hours here with your mean lumens, right? And by the time you take into account luminaire efficiency, that's really about how much light really makes it out of the luminaire in the HID world. You get to 16,800 hours. You're about half. Okay, and that was what it was. I mean, that was, you know, efficiencies for luminaires always were around 72 to 75% for some of the better ones, so you automatically lost about 25% of your light. Now compare it to an LED luminaire. We just had to report numbers differently for LED, right? So the idea of, for example, initial lumens, you really didn't lose a lot. You don't lose a lot in anything from an orientation perspective. LED, particularly newer sources, the depreciation curve is not even remotely as steep as it was for HID, so you weren't losing a lot there. Luminaire efficiency, essentially when we calculate how much light is coming out, we're doing it, we're not necessarily factoring what's coming out of the luminaire, we're assuming everything is coming out of the luminaire. So you start with 21.9 and you end up with 21. So that's a different equation. So hopefully that kind of gives you a sense if you're sort of thinking about, all right, how do I compare HID to LED? That's one way to kind of compare those. The other thing is how light levels change over time. It's really important. Like I said, in healthcare, nobody's moving out next year, 5 years, probably even 10 years down the road. So how much light will you maintain over time is really, really important. We know that in HID, in the HID world, we use a term called catastrophic failure, which is kind of a really aggressive term to basically say the lamp fails, right? It'll go out, it'll die. And with LEDs, we just depreciate, lumens depreciate, right? So it's parametric failure. So if you looked at that from a 400 watt metal halide, you would essentially see that at about, you would see that about 15,000 hours that lamp would die, it would kind of burn out. Older LED luminaires, you would see that, okay, at 50,000 hours here, you would have 70% of your initial light output. Look where we are now, though, right? You're starting to see 90% of initial output, even going out to 100,000 hours. So this is a really promising thing when you think about your investment for the near, the medium, and the longer term. So this is kind of a silly slide, okay? Don't kill me for this slide. When you think about just the kit of parts that we had in the source level technology and why, you know, when we talk about equivalency, why this makes sense, I think about it as a water hose, right? So how would you water your lawn? Are you going to water your lawn like they do on the left, or are you going to do it like they do on the right, okay? So the left is just, it's just flowing out of the hose. You could get fancy like I do and use your thumb and like spray it a little bit, which is really very sophisticated, and you could diffuse it a little bit more, but truthfully you're going to use the sprinkler method, right? That gets the water where it's needed. All my engineering colleagues are going to kill me because I'm going to say don't sprinkle the light, don't sort of do the water hose thing with the bulbs. Essentially what we had with HID and high-pressure sodium is that we had an omnidirectional lamp, and we essentially used funhouse mirrors and optical acrobatics to get the light where it needed to be. Now that we have teeny tiny point sources, we are able to direct the light where it's needed as opposed to doing the optical acrobatics. So what does that really mean? I mean, why do we even care about that? Because when we sprinkle the light, promise you it's the last time I'm going to say that because that sounds really stupid, but if we use kind of a directional approach as opposed to really the optical acrobatics, what it means is that I can provide better uniformity. So if you look at this heat map, right, where you have LED lighting and you have hot spots and cooler spots, and particularly if you compare it to HID lighting, you start to see this right away. So under the HID lighting, the red would be the hot spot. So this is like you parking next to the pole in the parking lot because it feels safer because it's brighter there. But then you would have the light taper off around the pole. What you don't get that same effect. You see it a little bit more light level closer to where the source is. That's pretty straightforward. But you don't see the contrast. You really don't see that lack of uniformity that you did with HID, right? So that means less glare, better uniformity, better lower average to min light levels. and you can save energy, right? Because the other thing when you have more uniformity is that we perceive it as being brighter, right? So when I have hot spots and shadows, it'll feel dimmer than if it's uniformly at a lower light level. That's a key for you because we use that a lot in renovations, right, to make sure that the light level and the quality of light is really what we need. So let's just use a tangible parking lot example. So for example, this is the before. This is a parking lot. I know, mind blown there. 250-watt metal halide on these poles, which basically meant that the system was drawing for each luminaire about 295 watts in. Essentially, this parking lot was then relit, this is a few years ago, with an LED outdoor light that was 144 watts. So essentially, you're saving 50% right out of the bat. I want to toggle back and forth just a little bit to see if you can see it. Do you see some of the hot spots that you would have experienced in the HID world? And you still see some of it, but you see that overall the lot looks a lot more uniform when you're going to LED. Wait, there's more. So, okay, 144 input watts is great at 8 p.m. in the winter, but what about 2 a.m.? This is an office, this is a corporate campus, so ideally nobody's here at 2 a.m., but think about healthcare. Even at 2 a.m., your occupancy in your activity is not as high as people might think. So can you drop the light levels a little bit? So this is dimming down to 45% power. So initially you had a 50% saving just by changing out your luminaire. Now when you run it at 45% power, you're running it at 64 input watts. You still see the beautiful uniformity, but now you've got almost 80% savings, right? This is magic. This is how it happens. So essentially when you look at that comparison and you think about smarter source, better uniformity, the ability to control it, which I'll talk about, this is where you can get a really, really, really compelling value proposition. So just to kind of sum up different solutions, HID being on the left, and you can kind of see those brighter in the hot spots, depending on your pole spacing, which probably is not so much of a factor for a relight, but which solution, which distribution, you can either get equal light to what you had with the HID, so think about far right compared to far left, or you can meet your IES recommended values. You can maybe do less light, but you still have the beautiful uniformity either way, right? So moving forward, let's talk a little bit about color. In the indoor environment and healthcare, I talk about color saturation and fidelity and rendering and all that stuff all the time. You're like, Karen, why do I care about this? We know that it matters, and just to kind of underscore this, I just want to give you a little bit of comparison and then relate it back to application and why this is important when you're doing your exterior relight. So this is pretty obvious. Everybody knows that this is the visible portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. This is visible light. If you all went to lighting school, you remember your Roy G. Biv, which really talks about the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet that you see in the visible light here. Yay, Roy G. Biv, very helpful. I didn't appreciate it at the time. So here is the next thing, right? So if I know this is a visible light, and I know that, for example, so there's a couple of things about color perception. One is that it's really about the source, okay? So this is where the lighting folks shatter your dreams. If a color is not in your light source, an object can't render it. So your banana is not really yellow, okay? It's just that all your light sources have yellow in it, and that's what gets reflected back. I know, it's really sad to think about, but let's think about this, right? So essentially what I have on this slide on the left is what you call a spectral power distribution. If you use this term with all your lighting friends, you are going to be like lighting genius. It's awesome. Essentially it says, look, here's light in the visible spectrum. Here's all the energy across the spectrum. Noontime sunlight is really full of all those different colors. It's a beautiful light source to render objects. So essentially what this slide is saying is that I use noontime sun, and my red rose really is just very good at reflecting red. And so if I combine my light source with the reflectance of the rose, that's how I see a red rose. You're like, this is cool. I'm going to ace trivia now. Yes, you are, but here's why it matters for LEDs. And I'm not going to go through, and I haven't sort of taken all the spectral power distributions of all the light sources, but I just want to contrast two examples in particular. So for example, on the left you see standard high pressure sodium. Everybody knows high pressure sodium, right? You think about high pressure sodium, you think about really yellow light. So now your mind is not blown when I show you the SPD because you see those peaks at the yellow, a little bit into the green. On the right you see typical SPDs for different color temperatures for blue pump LEDs, where you have a blue LED that you use phosphors to shift so that you have colors across the spectrum. So without me even showing you application images, it doesn't matter which CCT you pick over on the right, you would assume that LEDs would probably render colors better than high pressure sodium, same as metal halide rendered colors better than high pressure sodium. Here's how it looks in practice. So here's an HPS retrofit. On the left, it was a high pressure sodium parking lot, nice comforting yellow, right? And then look on the right, you're able to have a little bit crisper light, and you're able to sort of pick out, the image may be small, but on the right you can see the colors of the different cars, kind of a big deal. On the left you cannot do that. So this is just how color really works in our perception and what it may mean for us. Here's another aerial view of a high pressure sodium retrofit with LED where you're able to see the red cars, etc. Under high pressure sodium, those red cars would have looked brown. May or may not be a big deal. Your security and surveillance folks probably think it's a big deal. Going forward, what are some other source level benefits? This is like a button I should own. I'm not a control freak, I'm a control enthusiast. It's true on so many different levels. But, you know, we can control outdoor lighting sources now, right? We couldn't do that before. If we were having an HID presentation, couldn't even talk about it. We all remember a couple of years ago at the Super Bowl, an amazing artist who shall not be named, Beyonce, was performing, lights went out. It took forever for the lights to come back on. In a healthcare facility, not to say that it's more important than Beyonce, but it might be, right? When the lights go off, you really want it to come back instantly on. So in addition to the instant on, we're able to employ outdoor control strategies, which are really, really helpful. So going from the simple, so photo controls, bi-level dimming, to sensor-driven part night strategies, and then also wireless and zone controls. And these are becoming more straightforward, simpler to implement, more budget-friendly than ever before. So if you shied away from outdoor controls because you thought it was going to be a science project, particularly for a relight, and as you get into these wireless strategies, I mean, certainly you should look at this again. In fact, I would say that you're wasting your money. I know this is a pretty unequivocal statement, but if you implement LED lighting and you're not using controls, you're not getting the full benefit. So I'm going to skip through these pretty quickly because I think these are relatively straightforward. Photo control is just, look, my outdoor light level is not high, I'm going to turn on the lights, okay? So you don't have day burners, right? Done. You understand that. Bi-level control, this in many cases was kind of zonal. So for example, you would have your lights on when it's dark, and in the middle of the night, maybe some of your array would kind of go out, right? So you would drop down the light level, usually do via some sort of switching, and then closer to dawn, you turn it back up. When you get to part night with motion, this is essentially saying you're going to plan to dim the lights in the middle of the night. However, in spaces where you want it to come to a higher light level when it's occupied, now you're always maintaining whatever minimum you need, then you use sensors to essentially kind of give you those spikes that you see, right? So where you see those spikes, presence was detected, lights come on. Now they don't slam on because that scares people, but they come up, you know, a couple of seconds to give you that higher light level. When we think about covered parking, right, so that makes sense in parking lots. When we think about covered parking, many of you have been in stairwells or in parking garage floors, and you can hear the lights come on. You can hear the relays. You can sort of feel like the lights are stalking you a little bit. In fact, you know, lighting folks, we're just nerds, and we don't have that great of a sense of humor. So sometimes we talk about lighting the victim versus, you know, having safer light levels. So, for example, if I had this going on with my covered parking in my parking garage, and I had sensors in each luminaire that didn't talk to each other, as I walked through this really creepy empty parking garage, the lights would just sort of pop on around me. What you're able to do very simply now with wireless is you can say, look, look, all you luminaires that are in this area, when presence is detected, you all come on so that the entire field of view is illuminated, as opposed to kind of this, individual effect, which is just super creepy, technical term. And how do you detect presence and vacancy in a way that feels natural and improves the experience? One thing is that be careful about your ramp down and your ramp up period. So essentially, motion is detected, the lights stay on. Essentially, after a while, so 5 minutes, no motion. The lights are going to ramp down over a period of, for example, 5 minutes, so that it's almost imperceptible. And then when motion is detected again, it'll come up over 3 seconds, right, so that you still have that light that you need, but it's not startling in any way. So controls are really, really important. How we do controls are getting simpler. This is a great strategy for you to think about. Third one. The third misconception that we're going to talk about is really around why we do exterior renovations and relight. So saving energy and reducing maintenance are the most important reasons to relight. I appreciate the fact that we have to pay for our projects through hard savings and maybe savings that are a little bit more qualitative. But a lot of times when you just bottom line what the biggest benefits are, they're not necessarily things that you can measure operationally. And we'll spend a little bit of time on that. So what matters overall? Safety, okay? Safety is really, really important. So that's really protecting people from stuff, right? So, the hazards, obstructions, that type of thing. Security is really protecting people from other people, potentially people with criminal intent, okay? So that's really the difference. We don't use safety and security interchangeably. Wayfinding, really important deal in healthcare where you're trying to illuminate where you are, where you're going, and how to get there. And then aesthetics. Healthcare facilities in general, there's a real importance of, first, you need the visual hierarchy so that you can understand where the campus is, where the facility is, but it's not just another building. It's part of the community, and that's really important as well. So when we talk about safety and security, we kind of define what those things are, protecting people from things, and then protecting people from people, which we sometimes have to do. And so let's look at what we know about sources and how it really does impact. So color. So when we think about having good color fidelity and having sources that render across the full spectrum, that's kind of a big deal. So if I knew that, let's just come to the near part of our image. On the left, well, on the right, you see that there is a yellow stripe that's really kind of showing you that I'm moving from the asphalt onto the sidewalk, and there may be a change. There could be a change in grade there. Okay, that's really easy to pick out, which is, they use yellow because they want people to see it. And it's easy to pick out in the right because that color is rendered well. On the left, it gets washed out. When everything is yellow, that yellow stripe doesn't mean anything to you. So what a night shift nurse, what a patient, what a visitor could be missing there is now a safety cue that is just really washed out because they're in a sea of yellow. So that's kind of important to identify colors and objects. The other thing that we talked about, we know now that we have more uniformity with LED sources. We're excited about that. It improves that sense of safety. Who wants to park in the shadows? Who wants to walk in the shadows? Shadows are one of those big things that really make you, I'm not even going to talk about security yet, make you feel like maybe you are literally on unsure footing. So that uniformity, if you look at the left side, which is an LED source, versus the right side, which hopefully you can pick out, that light dark really does compromise your sense of safety there. What about security? How secure are you? This isn't kind of a philosophical question. It's really about light and perception of safety. So there's not a study out there that says if you have more light, for example, there's higher levels of security. But it's pretty well understood that when we can kind of see what's happening around us, perception of security is going to increase for occupants, and it's also going to be a good deterrent, okay, for people who have criminal intent. So better probability of detection and apprehension, also a better deterrent for people who have nothing better to do. So we a lot of times when we think about light on a task, we think about these horizontal surfaces. Even in the preceding pictures, I showed you sidewalks and safety markings. Vertical illuminance is really important as well. I need to be able to recognize faces. So the source that can deliver better uniformity, better vertical foot candles for facial recognition, details at near distance, but then also greater distance. That's going to improve my perception of security. Certain things that you see very typically in healthcare environments, you see cameras, the use of high definition, other types of cameras is pretty pervasive, particularly in the 24/7 active facility. And then you also have physical barriers, fences, and other security gates and those types of things. So look at this kind of really, it's not really a before and after. What I have on the left is, so it's two parking lots on the same campus. There's a north and a south, and the images were taken at the same time. So one lot has metal halide, the other one has LED. This is not magic of Photoshop. These are these two images side by side. Which one do you think would be better if you're the surveillance guy to sort of figure out what's happening in the parking lot? I can barely, and I'm not even going to blame it on age, I can barely see the cars that are in the metal halide side. But clearly I can see the LED. Many of you who have gone through this, you have seen these similar results. Ask your surveillance folks about the lighting, and if you do a retrofit, make sure to get that image capture. It's really, really important. Wayfinding. Spend not too long on this. Even on this image, which is, so obviously it's a parking garage, you're using red and green here, right? We talked about color. And signage and symbols to help show people where to go. When you think about a hospital, for example, think about a children's hospital, right? You've got a 6-story parking garage, and one floor is the orange floor, and the next is the green, and the next is the blue. The combination of good color fidelity, those types of things, it helps those color cues, those wayfinding elements be more effective. We talked already about what wayfinding is. And it's really around illuminating where you are, where you're going, and the best path to get there. This image here where we have bollards on the right, I really just want to point it out. Wayfinding, I spend a lot of time talking about lights on poles and lights in parking garages. We know that people ambulate within and around healthcare facilities via a number of different ways. People could be in chairs, wheelchairs. People could be using assisted walking devices. We want to make sure that at all the levels and all the vantage points we're lighting these paths very safely. And aesthetics we kind of talked about. This is a beacon of the community. The aesthetics should match that. Stepping forward a little bit, what are some of the things that I should do if I'm just trying to be smarter about lighting? So anybody heard of bug ratings? You can't answer, but you can sort of shout it out in your conference room if that's where you are. So bug is not because you're afraid of bugs like me. It's really thinking about things like backlight, uplight, and glare. So if you've heard of the Model Lighting Ordinance, this was a great publication that kind of came out to help people just design outdoor spaces in a more effective, more sustainable way, and in one that sort of takes into account the night sky, but then also good conservation and illumination techniques. So it was developed in collaboration with the IES and International Dark Sky. So that's an IES publication, TM15. And essentially, and there are photometric tools that can help you do this, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. Any lighting specialist can help you figure out bug ratings for different luminaires. But essentially, they looked at backlight, so sources of light spill and trespass that you just don't need. So backlight being, okay, I'm trying to light a parking lot and I'm trying to go in front of me. Why do I have all this light spill behind me? And they would characterize the light, the L that comes, so you have BVH, BH, BM, and BL. So the L, M, H, and BH is low, medium, high, and very high. Similarly, you've got kind of this forward side, right, which is glare. So how much of that, for example, high angle glare do you have, which is so uncomfortable for us, what we call discomfort glare. So that would be characterized as well. Uplight, okay, so I'm trying to light a lot, or I'm trying to get good facial recognition, but the light is just emanating into the atmosphere. So you would categorize that from a low, medium, and high perspective. So that's really something to think about. Make sure that you kind of understand your bug ratings. It depends on what you're trying to do, whether it's performance or other methods. There's lots of different methods and regulations that tie into this. But don't forget about your bug ratings. I think sometimes It's so important, and we don't talk about it enough. Lastly, before I jump into some of this featured solutions, wanted to just remind you about, if you're, I don't know, bored or just an enthusiast, there are recommended practices out there by the Illuminating Engineering Society that give you a sense of how much light you need, what are some exterior lighting considerations to think about in outdoor environments. There's recommended practice 20 for parking lots, and then less relevant, although you see some of it, is RP8 for roadway lighting. Okay, did we learn anything? Woohoo! Okay, so wait, there's more. This is the area, and this is what I'm calling the speed round, because I really want to give time for questions, comments, anything like that. We're going to talk about, I mentioned earlier that the rate of product and technology advancement is just at a pace that is staggering, which is awesome. So I really want to kind of talk to you about some of the new solutions that Acuity has that are addressing some of the needs in these spaces. So buckle up. This is going to go quickly, but you'll get copies of this if you miss anything, or make sure to ask the question. So the first one, and this is the franchise. I say the franchise. D-Series products. I talked a lot about parking lots and area. What you see with the D-Series is you have a lot of flexibility. I will show you a family picture of this family next if you're not, bowled over by this one. But essentially the D-Series comes in number of different shapes. So from a pedestrian scale, if you have lower mounting heights, to something for larger lots. You have a consistent dayform with the D-Series family. The sizes that we showed on the previous slide are on the left, but you also have complementary wall-mounted luminaires, floods for things like signage, emergency is sort of one, or the hospital name, as well as parking garage luminaires and bollards that fit into this family. What you get here is you get a lot of flexibility. So in the D-Series, the small one certainly can replace up to 400-watt metal halide, as does the DSX1. When you get to the size 2, you're able to replace up to a 1,000-watt metal halide equivalent. And via the tools that are on the Lithonia website, you're able to kind of understand, look, here's what I have, here's probably what I should choose. So what do you like about the D-Series? What is there not to like? You've got great photometric performance. This is a family that has the most design flexibility, I think, in the entire outdoor range when you think about outdoor lighting. So precision lenses, you're getting more light on the target as opposed to everywhere else, and you can improve the appearance of the space. So nice modern form, light goes where it's needed. At 91% of initial light output, you are looking at a 20-year service life. So your grandchildren will be relamping these fixtures. Great efficiency and really beautiful, kind of clean aesthetic. If you move on from the D-Series, which certainly gives you the most flexibility, there's also a family, a very new family, that's really suited for smaller lots, right? So we think about the large hospital campus, but what about the urgent or the emergent care? What do we do there? D-Series is great, but sometimes you have a specific job and you have a targeted need. That's where the KAX comes in. You have 2 sizes for the area, going for, you can replace up to 400 watts on the size 1, 1,000 watts on the size 2. You also have a complementary wall family. A couple of really cool things that are coming out in the KAX, which is the newly launched family, only about 2 months old, I think. You've got field rotatable housings, and I'll show you some images on that. Thermally isolated drive compartment. You've got some great mounting options, integrated sensor options, as well as these small lot optics that we'll talk about. Features and benefits, you're seeing the 70% savings over metal halide that you are used to seeing now in your outdoor area. Luminaires, if you live in a geography where DLC premium rebates help you out in terms of making a business case, take advantage of them, because many of these products are listed with DLC premium. Skipping forward here, and here's another family shot. We always like to tout our lumens. You're going up to about 32,000 lumens, so you certainly have a lot of light flexibility there, and just choose the size that makes the most sense for you. When you look across these different lumen packages and power packages, and I know you want me to read every little number here, but I won't do it to you, you're still looking at around between high 60s into the 80% energy savings as compared to metal halide. So that's really, really compelling. Just choose the package that you need. Lots of different options, for example, and I won't read this off for every single family that we show, but you have lots of CCT options. So you can get it in 3000K if that's your thing, 4000K, 5000K, at a typical 70-plus CRI, and you still have that long lifetime for that. A few things that you can kind of refer to later is the no-drill universal mounting. I don't know if anybody on the call is a pole aficionado. Not everybody knows all the characteristics of the poles. Not every time is your drill pattern going to match your area luminaire. This takes all of that guesswork out of it. So you can use existing pole-mounted holes, and you just use this no-drill feature, and you know that this will fit and it'll be secure. Field rotatable optics, it's another kind of mistake-proofing thing, right? So, for example, you order a luminaire and you have it in the field, and you need a little bit, you need the light to be slightly directed, rotated a little bit. This option allows you to rotate the optics 90 degrees left or right. So that kind of mistake-proofs it so you can get the light right where it's needed. And it simplifies the ordering, too, if you're not exactly sure. If you like rotate, you're going to love tilt, right? So think about it on the other angle here. You can also order a tilt arm that allows you to tilt the housing up to 80 degrees. So that, again, can give you a little bit more forward throw, but if there's guesswork and you're not exactly sure how you want to perfectly target or aim that light, this gives you a lot of that flexibility. You can combine them. You can have the best of both worlds. This isn't greed. This is just being smart. You can order both options together, and that gives you better illuminance right where you need it, and it also mistake-proofs some of your projects. Cool driver is happy driver, right? So you see this heat map. You've got a thermally isolated electrical compartment. Certainly when we were thinking about the early days of LED, the driver was the area that we were most concerned about, and heat and drivers are not best friends. But coolant drivers are, so you can kind of see that that thermally isolated compartment does assure that long driver life, which translates into long system life, which is what we care about. Look at that cute little motion sensor there in the base. You're able to have that fully programmable bi-level motion sensor, factory installed, different options based on your mounting height, right? So these are all passive infrared. Depending on your mounting height, you just choose which one you want. So how do you position the two? So essentially, the way that I think about it, and I think it just makes a lot of sense, is the KAX, which is our newest luminaire, really makes a lot of sense for these smaller parking lots. You get this great forward throw. You've got the field rotatable optics, so you can kind of mistake-proof your installation. You don't have all the photometric distributions of the D-series, but you have enough where kind of the geometry is relatively well-defined, smaller area. When you get into larger lots, really where you want a lot more photometric precision, you want to stay with the same family but be able to do different types of distributions, different heights, et cetera, different lumen ranges. That's when you really want to go to the D-series. The D-series is one that we see all the time in healthcare facilities just because of that flexibility. The other thing is that it coordinates really well with the other forms, so you get that consistent dade form. You also have special features like lead optics, amber light, so lots more options in the D-series area. So the goal there is to just give you all the choices that you need. If you have a very traditional form in mind, and say, for example, you have a shoebox like the KALD or the KALD, you have a couple other options. So this luminaire here, you have that traditional form, but you also have a retrofit door. So if you were one of the millions and bazillions that has a KAD in your parking lot, you're able to also take advantage of the retrofit door option, which really simplifies the installation. And ease of installation is the key here. So you see a lot of those similar traits. You see the traditional widely accepted day form, 20-year service life, integrated sensors, all the good stuff that you're used to seeing here. Through this a little bit. Bi-level motion sensors and also some field adjustable sensor options there. It's available for some of your DLC retrofit categories if you're going into the retrofit door, so that's an option to consider as well. Wallpacks, So these are areas that I think are sometimes neglected, but when we think about the security of the facility, the facade and all those perimeter areas are really important. So Lithonia Wallpacks that you should be used to seeing, the TWH for glass lenses, and then also the TWP, which comes in polycarbonate. So you have that classic day form, but you're able to really save a lot of energy with a really long life. The other reason that we have a classic day form here is that sometimes if I went too crazy with the day form and you had a fixture that looked just like this, you guys would have to paint or do something else with your facade because it would look a little strange. So this is why we've kind of kept that classic day form. So same front and back housing, but you are optimizing around the LED source. So you're not just putting LEDs into an old form, you're optimizing around that. Here's just an image of before and after. I did not stage that middle one to look green. Maybe they were just being fancy. But you see kind of that difference, right? That's just certainly a more inviting and I think more safe and secure perimeter with that Wallpack renovation. We always get a lot of questions about glare. Glare is really, really, really important, or the avoidance of glare. When we look at parking garages can sometimes pose a challenge for us because we have lower mounting heights and sometimes you're used to an outdoor, and you need a lot of light to ensure that vehicles and people are moving through very safely. So the PGX is a great answer to that because essentially what you're doing is you're still being smart photometrically about how you deliver the light, but you're able to do it in a package that gives you great visual comfort, which is super important in the parking garage sort of space. Still saving up to 86% energy, 100,000 hour or 12-plus year service life. In the parking garage world, we assume 24/7. You're able to control this as well. So again, just because you're operating 24/7 doesn't mean that those lights have to be on 100% all the time. But the beauty here is that you've got inner refractive glass lenses, and you also have secondary glass optics that are really just going to soften that light, which is just really, really important visually. And you're going to have a good, robust luminaire that will last you for years to come without pixelization, which is really important. When you compare this, for example, and there are 3 different lumen packages here, to metal halide, you're able to save from 70 to, mid-80s, almost 90% energy over your HID equivalent. So that's pretty compelling. Wireless controls. You can either do integrated sensors on a standalone, or you can use wireless controls that allow you, as we talked about before, to sort of zone your controls and to have the luminaires talk to each other so they can operate in concert. And finally, when you kind of wrap up a little bit, we also have our D-Series Parking Garage luminaire. Again, you have lots of optical flexibility. Very little, if any, maintenance on this, many different distributions. So depending on your parking garage, you may want to choose one of these different distributions to ensure that you're lighting the aisles and the walkways and the parking spots effectively. Here's some application images of that. So, when you compare sort of the offering, you say, okay, what am I going to use when? You essentially have smaller lumen package DSX Parking Garage luminaires, right? So get you good light levels that you can use to replace some of the incumbent sources. You have visually comfortable solutions, then you also have higher performance, more light distributions that you can choose from. So in conclusion, because we have tons of questions that I really want to get to, think about outdoor. It's minimally disruptive for your healthcare facilities. You can realize your organizational activities around safety, security, sustainability, and experience. And I'm not just talking about patients. I'm talking about your staff, looking at you, night shift nurses and security. It's always a good idea to do a couple of common sense, really smart things, right? So think about the quantity of light that you use and how it's distributed. We don't have to overlight spaces anymore. We don't have to generate offensive glare. We don't have to light our space and the neighbors, okay? You don't need the same amount of light as used with old sources. If you do that, you're probably overshooting it. Use controls. We can now, right? It's a new kind of tool, right? So again, 2 a.m., 2 p.m., 7 p.m., think about that. Quality of light is really, really important. We spent all day talking about this on the indoor side, not enough time talking about it on the outdoor side. Color fidelity, uniformity, wayfinding, all those things are super important. I think you've seen like 150 slides on new products, so rest assured there are more product choices to help you find the right solution for your campus. And if you want more, like, hit us up. We would love to talk more about this. And in keeping with talking more about this, let's open it up to questions. Thank you for your time. And wake up, everybody else.
Okay, Karen, we're going to try to get through as many of these as possible. Thank you, everyone on the line. We've got a lot more questions than we can address directly right now, but we will address all of them and send answers to the entire audience in a link. For now, Karen, here's the first one, and actually there are two that are related. What about industry standardization? And the second one that relates to that is there's a problem from a lack of standardization in the obsolescence when maintenance requires that a fixture be replaced, or at least the LED driver is replaced, or a system be expanded. Unless a fixture can be replaced, an owner can be left with a mismatched installation.
Mm-hmm. It's a really, really, really great question. And where we are with LED luminaires as opposed to what we had before we had modules, right? We had a lamp. All of us, all manufacturers, we worked around it. We figured out who had the best light delivery mechanism to get the light out of that lamp. Just like with computers, what we're finding with LED sources, and it's a system, right? So my choice of LEDs and my choice of driver and how I manage the thermals and how I manage the optical design and all of that, it all works together so that we can say, okay, you're going to get this. And so I agree. I agree. I mean, some level of standardization, I anticipate that things like, for example, lumen packages, so choices across like color temperatures, lumen packages, that might get a little bit more standard, so you'll know this, so you'll be able to compare across. But the innovation hasn't quite stopped in LED, and there's still more room to create better, more compelling products that deliver more light with less glare at a lower cost. And I still think there's a little bit of runway left. So maybe in the medium term you'll see more standardization. And I already see it was so crazy in the early days. I'm already seeing some standardization occur. I wouldn't say we're ready to call time on the differences among manufacturers. In fact, at this point for a customer, it's beneficial. It's beneficial to have those differences because it's really pushing the envelope in terms of better design. Don't forget, too, I think there are some features that I had to speed through, things like retrofit doors and universal mountings, and then you've got initial prices coming down. So your options, it may not be that you have to take this huge fixture off a pole, for example. Your options may open up, right, where you can just replace the portions that you need, but still effectively have a feel of a brand new luminaire. Like, I don't want Steve Jobs, although that would be weird because he's RIP, but to retrofit my iPhone. I want a more affordable iPhone and not to waste what I had before, and I want more features when I upgrade. So, great question.
Okay, here's another one. IES photometric data is necessary for real lighting design. We need to meet necessary uniformities without overlighting. How directional are LEDs in current designs?
How directional? So when you look at your IES recommended practice, there'll be recommendations for horizontal surface and then vertical illumination, and then either average to min or max to min ratios to ensure that you don't have the uniformity issues. It depends on the luminaire. So many of the luminaires that I talked about, some of the ones that we had in the before and after, the way that the arrays were laid out was really directional. So essentially, you were able to, that with some additional optics, you were able to really sort of drive the light right where you need it. There are some forms that are harder to be directional. Think about kind of those classic kind of post tops that you would see in kind of a small town USA, where where the light is sort of, you have more of a glow than sort of a forward throw. I'm probably not explaining that well, but it sort of depends, right? If you need the directionality, LEDs are uniquely suited to do that. You have an array, as opposed to a big omnidirectional light source. So if you need directionality and you need forward throw, you absolutely have it.
Okay, we have a couple more, I think, that are a little more specific also. What about pole heights / spacing / bases for new installations?
So what you are able to do, and I'm going to infer, so hopefully I get the question right, but if I don't, like, ask it again and we'll try harder. What you can do with LED, what I didn't spend too much time on, is because of the inherently sort of directionality of the source, when you are starting from scratch, many cases you can increase things like pole spacing, for example, because I'm not just thinking about, okay, I've got this blob that I've got to shape around. I can direct more light to the side, you know, wherever I need it. So you are, in many cases, able to increase pole spacing when you're able to start from scratch. If you're thinking about an existing facility, sometimes it's just not feasible unless you need to replace your poles. In terms of pole height, it depends. What I think you saw is, in terms of some of the solutions, you have a lot of lumen packages, right? So it really is a function of how much light and how much will get to the target. When you have, you know, LED packages like we showed that can replace 1,000-watt metal halide, or high-mast projects that we do all the time, pole height is not too much of a restriction anymore. Just be careful about pole height, right? It doesn't, you know, think about how much light, the quantity of light, and where that pole is. You just want to be careful about glare. That's just the thing, right? Don't overshoot it if your pole heights are relatively low, because that high angle glare could bother people.
Okay, and we have reached the end of our hour, so Karen, do you want to close?
Sure. Okay, I will. Thank you so much for the participation. I see that there were a ton of questions that came in. We will make sure to answer every single one. And again, if we don't get it right, come back and ping us. We'd love to continue this dialogue. Reach out to me. Reach out to the links in the webinar if you have questions, concerns, or if you have a project that you need help with. Really, really appreciate your time. This is fun for me to talk about healthcare and lighting. So hopefully you got something out of it. And thanks again. And we're concluding the webinar. Go back to your day. Thank you, everybody.